or Pratham?
Hi, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, Pratham, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, hello. A very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us this evening for this lecture. We are extremely excited and elated to welcome you to this another distinguished guest lecture, which is titled Anthropology and Museums in India from the Colonial Period to the Contemporary Times. Reiterating once again, we are super excited to have you all with us here. So, just before the formal proceedings, I would like to take a moment to introduce Anthropos India Foundation and our founder, Dr. Sunita Reddy. Anthropos India Foundation is a trust registered in Delhi in October 2011. The aim of AIF is to promote the discipline of anthropology, its philosophy and methods, and engage in applied and action research. AIF, through its work, seeks to address issues in the local context based on the emic perspective and bottom up approach to solve the problems faced by communities and its people. Taking due consideration of the local knowledge and respecting the local culture and ecology, AIF has been conducting community based research and in its effort has tried to inform the policy initiatives too. Apart from conducting the community based action research, AIF also organizes distinguished guest lectures by eminent anthropologists and social scientists, which are recorded and available on our official website. The main aim of this lecture series is to share knowledge with the young scholars and future generations. AIF is also promoting visual anthropology through vibrant, authentic, meaningful ethnographic films and photo documentation. We also publish a quarterly multilingual digital magazine called Childhood Matters and a monthly newsletter. We also have our own publishing house called Anthropos Books, and we published a maiden book on child rights in 2023. Just a bit about our founder, Dr. Sunita Reddy. Dr. Sunita Reddy is an associate professor at the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health, JNU. She has 22 years of teaching and research experience. She has a background of medical anthropology and research in areas of disaster, mother-child health, gender violence, child rights, tribal health, indigenous medicine, migrant workers, medical tourism, and surrogacy. She has published widely, having 9 books and numerous articles slash papers in peer-reviewed journals and newspapers. I would now like to hand over the mic to Professor Reddy to begin and to move forward with the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pratham. I really welcome each and every one of you, and I'm really very glad to have very distinguished scholars here, Professor Amareshwar Galla and Professor Basa. The lecture today is by Professor Basa, but we are very fortunate to have Professor Gala to give a brief introductory note before we have the lecture. So, before we hand it over to our distinguished scholars, I would like to request Dr. Shweta to formally welcome and also introduce our speakers today. Thank you. Please unmute Shweta.
Thank you, ma'am, for that introduction. And it's definitely a great learning experience and this is always a very exciting moment for us to have such distinguished people amongst us, and really looking forward to the lectures. But first, just a little note on Professor Gala. Uh, an alumnus of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and the Australian National University, Canberra. Amar Sir is currently Pro-Chancellor KISS and Distinguished Professor of Indigeneity and Inclusive Museum and Heritage Studies, Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, and Kalinga Institute for Industrial Technology, Bhubaneswar. Salzburg Global Fellow, UNESCO Chair on Inclusive Museums and Sustainable Heritage Development, Anant U, India, Emeritus Faculty, Australian National University, Canberra, Executive Director, International Institute for the Inclusive Museum, Australia, India, and USA, founding member of UNITWIN UNESCO Network of Tourism, Culture, and Development, and so on and so on. It runs into pages. We are so privileged to have you, Professor Gala. As Professor Basa also mentioned, that you are authority in this field, and it makes even if it makes someone like Professor Basa a little nervous, then we feel like toddlers in front of you. And thank you so much for consenting to come here and encourage all of us here at AIF. And just if you could address everybody before I invite Professor Basa.
Thanks, Sweta. Thanks, Aryan, and thanks, Sunita, Professor Reddy, for asking me to join in. I really appreciate it. What can I say about my younger brother? You know, and Professor Basa is one of the few people who is truly interdisciplinary and who has got his fingers in the dirt. That means he's a very practical man of praxis, a scholar of praxis. And I
Okay, looks like a signal problem. Okay.
Yeah, yes.
We'll wait. Okay, got disconnected. I think he'll connect back. Let's wait for a minute or two. Is it raining in Bhubaneswar, sir? Oh, Basa sir is in Delhi, so
I'm in Delhi. So I'm going to Bhubaneswar tomorrow. That's why I fixed the lecture today.
yeah.
Now it's better. Unmute.
Please unmute, sir.
Please unmute. Professor Galla, please unmute.
Yeah, sorry, it's the internet connection at KISS. So I can't. And can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Now, I wanted to say that, I was about to say that I missed Professor Basa by very short a few years at Cambridge. I was in Churchill College. Raymond Alchin was my supervisor. So Raymond Alchin and Bridget Alchin, both of them treated me as their own family member. And so it was one of those moments that I could have met Professor Basa, but he's much younger than me. So there you are, I missed him. But I met him subsequently, and it's been a great pleasure and honor. Now, there are three things I want to say about Professor Basa's, as an introduction from my side. There are very few people who really have addressed the interface between anthropology and museums in India. Not many people, not many in our contemporary times. Second thing is there are very few people who've been reflexive, revealing, and confronting in the way we need to rethink museum anthropology like Professor Basa has. And he's truly interdisciplinary in that sense. Archaeologist, eminent anthropologist, and museologist. And the third thing I want to say is that our conversations, our friendship evolved about on the surface, on the discourse of decolonization. And that's how we connect. And what a wonderful title, Anthropology and Museums in India from the colonial period to contemporary times. And I'm so looking forward to hearing you, Professor Basa. Thank you for, what a wonderful scholar you've been. I have so much to learn from you. Thank you. Look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, so I will just take a moment to formally introduce Professor Basa. Um, Born in 1958 at Baripada, Odisha, Professor Kishore Kumar Basa stood first in Odisha in HSC exam in 1973 and was first class first in BA History Honours exam in 1977 at Utkal University, and MA in History from DU and MA in Anthropology from Utkal University. Professor Basa completed his PhD in Archaeology from University of London and was a Commonwealth Academic Staff Post-Doctoral Fellow at the University of Cambridge. A former head Department of Anthropology, Utkal University, Professor Basa has the rare distinction of heading 7 leading organizations of the country, which include Director Indira Gandhi Rastriya Manav Sangrahalaya, Bhopal, Indian Museum, Kolkata, and Anthropological Survey of India, Vice Chancellor Maharaja Sriram, Chandra, Bhanja University, Baripada, and Fakir Mohan University, Balasore, as well as Director General, Archaeological Survey of India, and Chairman, National Monuments Authority. Recipient of 2 gold medals, the Surajmal Saha Memorial Gold Medal and Professor Ghanshyam Das Memorial Gold Medal. Professor Basa was also a Tagore National Fellow, Ministry of Culture. He was President, Anthropological and Behavioral Sciences section of Indian Science Congress in 2007 and Archaeology section of the Indian History Congress 2007 and delivered the presidential address in the annual conference of ISPQS in 2011. He has delivered 12 memorial lectures in various parts of the country and has 12 students who've been awarded PhD. He has published in the fields of anthropology, archaeology, and museum studies, and even excavated sites of Malikhoja, Bang-Harirajpur, and Gouranga Patana in Odisha. He's the founder editor of the journal Humankind and general editor of a series on intangible cultural heritage of India at present. He is the chairman, Indian National Confederation and Academy of Anthropologists, INCA, and chairman of the National Monuments Authority. Professor Basa, we welcome you wholeheartedly, and we still feel like toddlers, ready to learn from you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Reddy, Dr. Sweta, Pratham Gupta, and my esteemed senior colleague, Professor Amareshwar Gala. I'm grateful to the Anthropology Foundation for inviting me to this lecture series which has been delivered by very distinguished anthropologists of this country. I feel it an honor to be invited for the purpose, and especially when a person like Professor Galla is present. As I said informally in the beginning, it gives a mixed feeling of being excited about it for his presence, but also some kind of apprehension, because when you are speaking before such an authority, one has to be very careful. Today, my lecture, the title, as you know, Anthropology and Museums in India from the colonial period to the contemporary times. In fact, I worked on this as a part of Tagore National Fellow. Now, my lecture will be in 3 parts: Anthropology and Museum during the colonial period, then Anthropology and Museum after independence, where it will be subdivided into 2 parts: museums directly relating to anthropology, like National Museum, IGRMS Bhopal, then State Museum, tribal museums in tribal research institutes, and Anthropology Museum in various universities. And then the second category, I think that is very challenging, that is museums with anthropological perspectives. And there we'll discuss some of the number of museums with challenging concepts. Towards the end, and very brief discussion on implications of COVID-19 for museum anthropology. Now, let me start with a quotation by John Mackenzie. And here he writes, according to him, museums were an expression of the Western conviction in the onward march of the rational. The 19th century museum lay at the heart of this. It constituted the public face of scientific endeavor, a point of contact between scientist and public exhibition, between empirical collecting and theorization, and between such scientific discourse and popular understanding. Reverence in the face of grand mysteries gave way to a sense of possibilities of knowing, and therefore the opportunity for power, protection, and control. Now, this sort of summarizes the kind of 19th century museum. Now, let me quote Dr. Kalyan Chakravarti, who was the director of Indira Gandhi Rastriya Manav Sangrahalaya from 1994 to 2000. And during his time, there was a paradigm shift in the Indira Gandhi Rastriya Manav Sangrahalaya, and he represents the kind of decolonizing voice as far as museology is concerned. And let me quote: the cultural context of the community museum in India is one in which there is no tradition of a museum on the Western model for documentation, collection or display of the relics of dying or languishing cultures of communities. The context instead is the post-colonial one, in which the communities are still living but under the threat from one neo-colonizing, homogenizing, globalizing community. The museum, therefore, can no longer serve a useful purpose in this changed context by retaining its colonial role of mapping and appropriation of knowledge and artifacts to represent communities, leaving the communities themselves to fend for themselves against the engulfing tide of uniformitarian development. So you can, these two quotations give the kind of two different perspectives between the 19th century museum and the 21st century museum. In India, both anthropology and museum are colonial constructs. We know that. Anthropology in India began as a study of the other from the vantage point of the colonial master. Museum in India started as a repository of natural, historical, and cultural objects, including samples of material culture of the other. Museum is regarded as the institutional homeland of anthropology. However, it took a long time for anthropology to find that homeland. Talking in his classic book, considers modern museums as secular temples and are distinctly material. In Europe, inspired by the back-looking curiosity of Renaissance, princes and aristocrats had cabinets of curiosities who constituted the precursors of museum. By early 19th century, the British Museum in London emerged as the foremost of the knowledge-producing institutions of the empire, exemplifying the idea of the imperial archive. By the mid-19th century in Europe, museums for distinct fields or separate disciplines of knowledge emerged in various parts in Europe. And what are the purposes of 19th century museums? Classical learning, mechanical utility, natural, cultural, economic, or political well-being, moral uplift, social control, and the like. Now, until 2022, we were depending on a definition by UNESCO in 1974. But recently, a comprehensive definition of museum has been made by this International Council of Museums in its extraordinary General Assembly meeting held in Prague on 24th August 2022. So this is a very recent definition of museum. According to it, a museum is a not-for-profit permanent institution in the service of society that researches, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits. This was earlier there in 1974 definition, but then this tangible and intangible has been added. Then open to the public, accessible and inclusive, museums foster diversity and sustainability. This is another new addition. They operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities, offering varied experiences for education, enjoyment, reflection, and knowledge sharing. So this is the latest definition of museum by ICOM. Now, let us discuss anthropology and museum in India during the colonial period. Now, obviously, the beginnings of anthropological investigations were made by the Asiatic Society of Bengal, set up in 1784 by Sir William Jones. Anthropology as an academic discipline developed much later, in 1921 at University of Calcutta. Subsequently, British administrators, travelers, missionaries, and some other anthropologically inclined scholars collected data and published on life and culture of tribal and folk communities of India. So here in this lecture, we'll discuss only two museums, composite museums, Indian Museum, Kolkata, and the Government Museum, Chennai, because these two are very important from the anthropological point of view. Indian Museum came up in 1814 with the increasing number of collection of natural, cultural, and antiquarian objects in Asiatic society. Therefore, Nathanlal Walik, a Danish prisoner of war, he wrote a letter to the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1814 and suggested that there should be a museum. And this museum was known as the Oriental Museum of the Asiatic Society. There were initially two sections, archaeology and ethnology in one section, and botany, zoology, and geology on the other. Ethnographic specimens were merely stored in the reserve, but not displayed for want of space. The Indian Museum Act of 1866, John Anderson became the first curator who showed some interest in the anthropological collection. And the Great Calcutta Exhibition of 1883-84, where there was a display of botanical and anthropological objects. Now, this is Nathanlal Walik. This is the Indian Museum building. Now, there is a central constitutive art in the early phase of Indian Museum. There was that of collecting and not of display. In 1884, an intriguing list of 16 collecting areas, including 4 relating to ethnology, was there. Now, out of these 16, because it's a composite museum, so all kinds of things were being collected. Out of 16 categories, 4 related to ethnology. Instruments of war peculiar to the East, instruments of music, vessels used in religious ceremonies, implements of native art and manufacture. In 1816, a number of early donors were there, and very interestingly, that included 6 women donors to that museum. Now, Mackenzie considered that this 16 list, number of 16 categories, it's a very striking list for 3 reasons. First, almost all the categories entirely concerned with India. Second, the list headed by cultural materials, including ancient cultures and indigenous crafts. Third, geological concerns only at the end of the list. Now, according to Tapoti Guha Thakurta, this list concerned with the objects of science and with relics which illustrate ancient times and manners. Second, the fields of archaeology, ethnography, and natural history were already forming themselves around this intended gathering of objects. But there was as yet no separating out. So what I meant to say is that one should not just see this collection as just collections. These collections represent the nascent growth of different different disciplines that grew in 19th century India. Third, the defining paradigm for the entire collection was all that was unique and peculiar to India. These are some of the early collections, ethnographic collections. Now, Indians gradually started giving gifts to the museum. In 1932, out of 49 donors, 6 were Indians. Ram Kamal Sen, Kali Kishan Bahadur, Maharaja Radhakant Dev, Mathurnath Malik, Sivachandra Das, and Her Highness Begum Samru. Ram Kamal Sen, he was the Diwan of Bengal Bank and the first Indian secretary of the Asiatic Society. And he's one of the world's earliest donors to the Indian Museum in the 1830s, and whose donation was of great ethnographic interest. For example, implements used in the Charak ceremony, material used by Bairagis, ornaments worn by women in Odisha, 3 small Buddha images, and 51 musical instruments. These were given by Ram Kamal Sen. And this is a Mayuri Veena. This is, I think it is from Andaman Nicobar. Now, another person who deserves critical attention is Edward Horace Mann. Now, Edward Horace Mann was in Andaman and Nicobar Islands from 1871 to 1901, 30 years, when he retired as Deputy Chief Commissioner. Now, he had the reputation of collecting, so he collected and donated ethnographic objects to many important museums in Europe. He followed a scientific, systematic, and comprehensive collecting methodology, relying on the notes and queries in anthropology. I mean, he was and his collection was a close embodiment of Susan Pierce's definition of the systematic collector, whose methods are accorded an intellectual primacy rooted in scientific reason, and whose central aim is to complete a set. Theoretically, Mann's collection had 2 aspects. One is the evolutionary anthropology. That means savagery, barbarism, and civilizations. The unilineal theory of evolution, in which material culture was regarded as the key for demonstrating evolutionary progress and gradualism, by arranging objects from perceived simplicity to complexity of their formal or functional quality. The strategy was to sort of put your collection into the evolutionary framework, whether it represents savagery, whether it represents barbarism, lower barbarism, middle barbarism, or upper barbarism, that kind of thing. So so Mann's collection was very much influenced by this evolutionary anthropology. And second theoretical aspect of Mann was Solvay's ethnography paradigm of collecting, a comprehensive picture of traditional Andamanese and Nicobarese material culture, aimed at a simple of every single type of traditional use and suitably free from foreign influence. He tried to collect materials which were devoid of any foreign influence. 2 detailed catalogs on material collections. Mann wrote one on Andaman with 83 objects, 1883, and on Nicobar with 147 objects. It's a handwritten one, but published in 1895. Catalog functioned as a modern day mail order catalog. For example, the idea was that he will send the catalog, and then different museums in the West, they will give ask him to send the collection, and that he was doing. The documentation method followed by man was also very significant. Each object was given a number, its indigenous name, along with a description of form and use. Each object was numbered individually with different variations of an object in subdivisions. For example, 1A, 1B, 1C, etc. Photographs also illustrated some objects. Mind you, at that time, photography has come, but it is very expensive. 3 columns for description of the object. First column, indigenous name of the object. Second column, a detailed description of the item. Third column for remarks. And the importance is of such exercise of Horace Mann is that he brought the people of Andaman and Nicobar Islands to the attention of European anthropologists. He represents the classic modernist collecting paradigm as Susan Pierce conceived, that is rooted in measurement, distinction, and classification. The Great Calcutta Exhibition of 1883-84, models of tribal communities classified into racial ties prepared under the supervision of Risley. After the Great Exhibition of 1885-86, the ethnological collections were made over to the newly appointed officer in charge of Bengal Economic Museum. The combined economic, ethnological, art, and industrial collections belonging to the government of Bengal was handed over to the trustees of the Indian Museum on 1st April 1887. And here in this exhibition, as far as I know, some people, I think 1 or 2 persons from Andaman Nicobar were brought to show, that kind of human Jew. At that time, the 19th century, the concept of human Jew was also there. So they were brought in to let people know that it's how there are different kinds of persons exist or community exist in this world. Viceroy Lord Curzon, he was showing much interest in Indian Museum. Curzon is earned a very bad name for his partition of Bengal. But as far as heritage is concerned, Lord Curzon has played a very significant role. He made gifts of objects to Indian Museum. He arranged annual grant of ₹6,000 for the purchase of specimens of Indian art. And he used to visit Indian Museum and even was taking interest in the display of Indian Museum. This is an object of ivory. This is another textile. Now, ethnological collections were transferred to Zoology section in 1911. And Zoological Survey of India came in 1916. Anandel was in charge of Zoological and Anthropological section. He introduced systematic fieldwork for collection of specimens. So that is the contribution of Anandel. Took positive steps for utilizing anthropological specimens for study purposes. Set up a physical anthropological laboratory in Indian Museum. Carried out anthropometric measurements of Anglo-Indians of Calcutta. R.B. Seymour took over the charge of ZSI in 1926, and he requested the government to appoint an anthropologist for the anthropological section collection in Indian Museum. So until that time, until 1920s, there was no anthropologist for the ethnological collection, ethnographic collections. So therefore, B.S. Boa came in 1927 for the first time, and that anthropological collection of the Indian Museum came directly under the care and supervision of an anthropologist. As you know, B.S. Guha is trained both in anthropology and museum. Mind you, B.S. Guha will become the first director of Anthropological Survey of India. He worked on the museum in 1940s, worked on the museum collection and undertook field work, especially in Nepal, presently Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Andaman Islands, etc. He studied Indian population, both past and present. The racial classification on the present Indian population, initiated studies on skulls from excavated sites of Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Taxila, and some megalithic sites of South India. He prepared a report on the human relics recovered from the Naga Hills in the expedition for the abolition of human sacrifice during 1926-27, was also associated with the Census of India conducted in 1931, research and all-round development in the Anthropology Division of the Zoological Survey of India under B.S. Boa. Anthropology section of Zoological section of Indian Museum became a nucleus for the Department of Anthropology, now known as the Anthropological Survey of India, in 1945. Then let us discuss briefly Madras Central Museum or Government Museum, Madras. This was after the Asiatic Society set up this museum in 1814 at Calcutta, subsequently some museums came up in Madras, Trivandrum, Bombay, Baroda, etc. The initiative of Madras Literary Society and active assistance from the Court of Directors of the East India Company, the Madras Central Museum was opened in the College of Fort St. George in 1851. Surgeon E.G. Balfour was its head. When Dr. B.D. was the head of the museum, the brick collection was acquired and ethnology or anthropology was given a place for the first time in 1878. Photographic and documentation and lantern slides of tribal cultures are also there. And then it was a bulletin was brought out for publishing the accounts of his survey. Alexander Rees' collection of Adichanarul skulls and other skeletal fragments also came to Madras Museum, and Robert Bushfoot also made some gift regarding prehistoric archaeology. Excuse me. They developed the physical anthropology section. In 1930, B.S. Guha underwent training in physical anthropology. Sorry, this gentleman, I think, Ayappan came under the training of B.S. Guha in Indian Museum, because Ayappan was was a student of biological sciences. Then he was trained in Madras Medical College about the human skeletal things, and then he came to Calcutta to learn physical anthropology from B.S. Guha. So Thurston was the superintendent of the museum from 1885 to 1910, and he surveys caste and tribes of Madras. And while making this such a survey, he also took steps for collection of petrographic specimens. Then Rangachari was there. Rangachari brought in Ayappan. Now let us discuss the museums and the colonization of India. Markham and Hargreaves, while they were reviewing of the museums of the whole India, they find that the position of India with respect to museums is so lamentably low that it may be well here to inquire whether this is due to its history or to racial, climate, or other circumstances. Neither collections nor facilities. Rather, audience was the problem. Today, a very large proportion of the population of India is backward and illiterate and lacking in mental and bodily vigor, so that as a workforce, India occupies much more lowly position than that to which its vast extent, wealth, and population might seem to entitle it. And broadly speaking, the same difference is to be found in its provision for museums when compared with those of other countries. So they were making a comparison in 1930s about the situation of museums in India and other areas, and they were very disappointed. Now, we know that museum is a colonial construct to emphasize the need to bring under one roof the natural and cultural heritage of India. Thakurta pointed out that the functioning of the colonial museum in India has remained wrecked by a set of construed binaries, where knowledge stood pitted against wonder, where the scientific gaze battled to find a place and a set of various eyes, and where the prospects of education saw itself subverted by the demand of mere recreation. Utkal in 1912 opined that the Indian Museum at Calcutta has a larger annual attendance than any other museum in the world. From the recreation point of view, there cannot be the slightest doubt that our museums answer the purpose of eminently popular institutions. However, I need hardly add that the museum serves a more dignified object than the temporary amusement of the crowd. Now, with this general view, in my view, the introduction of a Western metropolitan concept of museum in a colonial context is not a passive process. You know, the museum we had museum like in India, we had museum like institutions, like Chitrakars were there, like in the temples, one could see some museum like institutions. But museum as a distinct concept was a Western metropolitan concept which was introduced in India. But then to me, this is when this application is not a passive process, but an active engagement in the colony. Because this is an example I give, that, you know, even from the beginning of the museum, emergence of museum in this country, people in Calcutta even now, during this winter, they take a bath in the Ganga, and then they go to the Ramakrishna Mission, and then they will come, what they call Jadughar, Indian, they will come to Indian Museum. So museum visit is a part of pilgrimage, because this is a part of pilgrimage. So museum visit is a part of pilgrimage, a typical Indian cultural response to a Western metropolitan concept called museum. So therefore, even if this concept has been introduced in India, it is not a mechanical reproduction. It is just that India passively received it without being actively engaged. The history of the Indian Museum and the intellectual history of modern India almost coincide because of the linkage of Geological Survey of India. Geological Survey of India came in 1851. Archaeological Survey of India came in 1861. ZSI came a little later. ZSI, BSI, Anthropological Survey of India, and all these disciplines had their collection in Indian Museum. Therefore, the development of these scientific disciplines and the development of museum, they coincide. This is my view. Museums indirectly legitimize colonial rule as a civilizing mission. See, although museums did not directly justify colonial rule, but then because these anthropological objects, they represent the objects of, let us say, the backward people, uncivilized people, and therefore you need the civilization of the West. So therefore, in an indirect manner, anthropology and museum gave legitimacy to the colonial rule. The ethnographic collections in the museums of India were inadequate and unbalanced development throughout the British period. Sarkar, who was a curator in anthropology in Indian Museum, was very critical of that. Dr. Anderson, according to him, the subject of ethnology in many of his departments has hardly been touched when we consider the exhaustive manner in which the science is handled by the great museums of the leading capitals of Europe. So they were just grumbling, they were being critical that the way Western museums are handling anthropological objects in India, although there is plenty of scope, but that is not being done. There is Hutton, there is a mass of material objects all over India, which needed to be gathered and preserved in museums. Saloni Mathur and Kavita Singh, in a very interesting publication in 2015, said that modern museum emerged what Bennett called as the phenomena of exhibitionary complex, to serve in increasingly sophisticated ways the formation of the new national and imperial identities of Euro-Western nation states. Museum in the colony is a lesser counterpart to the exemplary metropolitan institutions paradigm. So that means if it is British Museum in London, it is Indian Museum, it is Calcutta, but it is a lesser counterpart to British Museum. Museum defined by the politics of colonial patronage and the materialist acquisitionist needs of the great imperial knowledge production project. So, the colonial rule has been characterized by the materialistic acquisitionist needs. So that kind of perspective also was represented in the museum because of its policy of acquisition of objects, whether it is natural, historical, archaeological, or anthropological. The appearance of Indians within the museums as objects themselves dramatizes the paradoxical origins of museum as an institutional form. In highly undemocratic ways, the public is a subject society outside the domain of citizenship and rights. I mean, this I was referring to that human zoo when the Indian this exhibition came in Calcutta. They also discussed to what extent museum was indigenized. Then they said that I'm talking of Saloni Mathur and Kavita Singh. The instability of sacred and secular values according to museum objects and recreation as the central function of museum, known from the subaltern perception of museum as Ajaib Ghar, is a house of strange objects. Because museum, although its Bengali term is called Jadughar, and in Hindi term is called Ajaib Ghar, a house of strange objects. These appear to challenge the premise of a stable universal museum effect, because the professional perception of museum and the popular perception of museum were rather in a contrasting, rather posing as a contrast to each other. The notion at the heart of Alper's influential thesis that museums consolidated a specific way of seeing. Now let us discuss anthropology and museums after independence. Now, what are the changing perspectives in anthropology and museum studies? In anthropology, there is emphasis on globalization and culture. I mean, some people thought that globalization would lead to homogenization of culture, But then some other people, scholars said, no, globalization would imply celebration of cultural diversity. There was also discussion between global and local relationship. What is the linkage between global and local? And also Arjun Apadarai's classics, the impact of the globalization and culture, different scales, whether it is ethnoscape, media scales, finance scales, there are different scales. Arjun Apadurai thinks. I mean, I don't have time to discuss in details, but these have implications as far as the museums in post-independent India took up. Then there is also post-colonial theory, which challenged and contextualizing, which challenged the colonial discourse, and also it contextualized colonial stereotypes, and ultimately it has led to what we know as autoethnography. And this autoethnography, we find the trend is very dominant in Northeast, because the colonial ethnographers were writing to their people. For example, even a celebrated anthropologist like Farrar Hemmendorf wrote a book called The Naked Nagas. Now, this caption, this title, is not meant for Indians. This is meant to generate some kind of curiosity among the white Westerners. Therefore, autoethnography has emerged to challenge such colonial stereotypical discourse by the Westerners. Therefore, you find that the Nagas are writing their ethnography, the Bodos are writing their own ethnography, and also so on and so forth. Now, then there is a question of sustainable development. Development is not growth centric. It has to be economy and ecology have to be has to be fine blending, and therefore in sustainable development, this indigenous knowledge system also has to play a role. Then there is a question of development from below. I mean, this again is related to sustainable development. And there is also a concept of alternative development. Well, what is the development of the strategies of the nation state, and what is the alternative development from the voice from below? And then also there is a question of ethnicity and identity politics. I mean, this has also have tremendous implications for museum. And this is when I find that in Northeast, I've traveled extensively in Manipur, and you'll find, small museums have come up of different ethnic groups. So then, therefore, ethnicity, identity politics, and museum have become very integral to each other. Now, in museum, there is also the development of new museology. Now, what are the typical features of new museology? The new museology, let me tell you in a very very brief manner, that until the emergence of new museology in 1970s, 80s onwards, before that, what was happening is it was the curator who was collecting the artifacts and curating the display. So therefore, the dominant voice was that of the curator. But new museology challenged that. New museology said it is the voice of the community has to be there in the display. And the job of the curator is that of a facilitator. Therefore, there is an erosion of the arrogance of the curator as the sole custodian of cultural heritage. Now, that is the crux of new museology. So, new museology developed in France and then went to other parts of the globe. And Patrick Broylan makes a very good summary of the characteristic features of new museology. The true limits of the museums, not the boundary walls of the museum building, rather the whole of the defined geographical territory. The subject matter, not just with the collections within the museum building, but the total patrimony, natural and human, of that defined territory. Museum exists to serve not just visitors, but the total population of the museum's defined territory. And the driving force and control lies not with the expert staff, rather it is the community, its collective memory and will that are important. Therefore, the assertion of the community in the collection and display of museum objects, that is the importance of new museology. Therefore, the true owners of the museum should be ordinary people, not the staff or governing body. This is a radical concept. Han Nora Jones makes 2 points. First, academic anthropologists rarely consider museum anthropology as an important area for the employment of anthropologists. Second, museum anthropologists now practice in a highly politicized public setting, put current theory into practice in interesting ways. The new atmosphere of relevance and accountability a change from the isolation and triviality of past decades, making museum environment as dynamic and challenging an arena for anthropology as the halls of academia. Previously, what was happening was, that's another issue. I mean, I can give another lecture on this thing. What is the difference between academia and museum? The primacy of museum was when evolutionism and diffusionism were the main theories of culture change, because you wanted to the theories of evolutionism and diffusionism had certain material correlates. So these material correlates were considered as the example of the proof of evolutionism and diffusionism, and therefore, when these objects were in the museum, so museum and anthropology were almost integral. But with the emergence of functionalism, which consider anthropology as an ahistorical, or which consider tribal communities as ahistorical communities, museum, there was a distance between museum and anthropology. Now, with emergence of post-colonial theory and new museology, now there is, and again, museum theories is coming to the center stage of anthropological discourse. So that is the important thing to be borne in mind. And coming to India, Raman Lakshmi, he said that there are two problems in the West. Economic, that is, the Rotterdam's World Museum forced to sell their African and American collections because they couldn't manage it. Social, fundamental challenge to their identity and relevance. Visitors drawn to other sources of entertainment and amusement parks, because people are going to mall rather than visiting museums. So how do we manage a museum? Will these two challenges mean that museums will cede more and more control to private sponsors, visitors, and the community? This is the problem of anthropological museums in the West. Now that the problem is a little different in India. Here the problem is, and they are very critical, an immobilizing crisis of imagination, trapped in an uninspiring sameness, beautiful objects displayed indifferently, lack of storytelling, social context, or powerful experiences. This is the criticism of Mathur and Kavita Singh regarding these problems. Now, a complete and unforgivable apathy towards digital complex. Sorry, no, I'm sorry. This is Raman Lakshmi's view. I'm so sorry. Raman Lakshmi sees that the museum display in India is so boring. That's what he's critical of it. Complete and unforgivable apathy towards digital comfort, learning, or entertainment. The unspoken rhetorical code of our museum landscape is collect it, display it, and forget it. This is so radical. She's making a critic. Civilizational arrogance and envy. We have the objects, so we don't need to do anything else. India is a problem of plenty. We have so many antiques, so many examples of intangible cultural heritage that, we think that because we have this collection, we have these things, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to have a storytelling. We don't have to display it better. Just because the collection is there, we don't bother anything. So there is a mistaken belief that sharing it or breaking it down for the commoner would diminish its significance and perhaps its purity. To unpack the visual vocabulary of our museums. Our museums froze between the storing of archaeological objects during colonial period and patriotic missions of nation-building goals in the post-independent period. There is wonderful artworks and artifacts, but the museums did not communicate powerful and deep human stories. And in India, there is disruptive changes in communities, ecology, and livelihood. We know that. I mean, what is the price of development? Our museum should address the difficult social, environmental, and cultural anxieties that inevitably follow such transition. In a democracy like India, arguments are in political arena or in the media. The challenge is how to gently nudge a museum in India into the argument by radically reimagining it as a more constructive, contemplative platform for contested issues. So therefore, she's pointing out that we are argumentative Indian. We argue on so many things. So can we not bring these arguments and use museum as a platform for such arguments, such discussions, such dissemination? Now let me tell about certain Indian scholars who have contributed to the museological discourse. And to me, T.C. Das in 1943, he had made a brilliant. He has written a very small paper in a Calcutta-based journal. But I found that so interesting and depressing thanks to my friend Abhijit Guha, Professor Abhijit Guha, who drew my attention to this paper. For him, T.C. Das says that a role in the development of people instead of being more or less depository of curious. Mind you, he's thinking of linking museum to development. Think of 1940s. Now that concept is coming in 1970s in new museology. Because T.C. Das was very concerned about the nation building. What will be the role of anthropology? What will be the role of museum in nation building? Therefore, he is trying to link the museum in national building, especially in economy, not merely confined as a curiosity. And he is suggesting three types of museum: historical, artistic, and economic. He says that historical and art museums have been given undue preference. To him, it is the economic emphasis should be on the importance of economic museums. Economic museums it means basically objects which have got economic value. It could be plants, it could be stones, it could be anything like that. Which given that India is a poor country, should carry their exhibits to the very doors of the people instead of asking them to come to museums. So here is an element I find some kind of seed of new museology. Because in new museology, we believe that museum has to be taken to the communities. You can't expect the community always come. The challenge is twofold. You have to bring communities to the museums, and you have to take museum to the community. So, mind you, T.C. Das is saying 1943 that poor people cannot come to see a museum in the town. Therefore, you have to take museum to the communities. And what is he suggesting? He says that economic museums should bring knowledge about the existing means and methods of agriculture, commerce, and industries in different parts of the country in the first instance, and then of the outside world in concrete shape to the people who are mostly in need of it. And he says that there has to be a network of three different varieties of museums. First is central museums, second is local museums, and third is circuit museums. And he says that these circuit museums were to be organized by the authorities of the central museums in close cooperation with the local museums. And these circuit museums have to move from place to place. Therefore, the museum motto, it exists for the people, not scientists alone. Mind you, what a democratizing concept of museum in 1940s by T.C. Das. Then another gentleman is Sachin Rai in 1972, museum, and he delivered a presidential address in the Anthropology and Archaeology section of Indian Science Congress, and published as a book subsequently. And he suggested there has to be a museum of man, and the link between museum of man and cultural heritage. The museum has failed to make any significant contribution to anthropological research. Ethnography has been given stepmotherly treatment in Indian museums. Anthropological collection in 4 kinds of museum, national, state museums. That I will show you some slides. Now, objectives, and this was Sachin Rai said the objectives of museum should be to interpret the natural and cultural history of India, to educate the public about national problems. It is to be a center for academic and research work, greater realization of the oneness of India, to offer visitors a panorama of India's best examples of art and culture, to act as an extension of different departments of universities, to collect all categories of Adivasi cultures, to nourish scientific and humanistic studies, to present anthropology as an integrative study, to give equal emphasis to the 3 aspects of museum services, that is collection, display, and the organization of educational activities. An Indian Museum of Man should be set up, which should help eliminate prejudice and promote tolerance and human understanding. And also he is speaking of boosting of the folk art and popular traditions, which can be admirably combined with education in the sphere of the cultural heritage of a country in a museum dealing with anthropology and culture. And the last of my Indian theoretician is Kalyan Chakravarti, whose quotation I read in the beginning. Museums in India cannot adopt the ostrich-like policy of turning their backs on a biological, genetic, molecular, and cultural reductionism. Museums were unable to attract broad community interest because the collections and activities are unable to break out of the colonial mental mold and transcend their current role of being old curiosity shops. He says that, even if there is a continuation of the 19th century museological discourse, at the worst, the museums thus became teleological agents of the destruction of communities. At best, they were developed as places for aesthetic contemplation of the past, diverse from its context, or for sad but resigned reflection on the loss of ethnographic curiosities, which were interesting but were rightly doomed to die. Chakraborty argued that museums in India have to realize that the so-called disadvantaged rural communities are curators of their own in-situ museums. He says he's giving primacy to the community, and that their habits form the fabric of Indian history. The survival of the identity of rural communities is crucial to the survival of Indian identity and about the relevance of the museum project. Now, with this, let me give you some examples of different museums. First is Indira Gandhi Rastriya Manav Sangrahalaya. I was director for 4.5 years. Unlike other national museums which were set up to house collections, IRMS began not with any artifact in position, but with certain ideas only. A unique feature of this museum is open air exhibition. Those of you who visited this tribal habitat, coastal village, desert village, Himalayan village, mythological trail, traditional technology, Kumar, these are the all open air exhibitions. And there is also a museum building, Viti Sankul. Now, there are certain important features of IGRMS. First, IGRMS promotes national integration not by homogenizing culture, but by celebrating cultural diversity with an inherent basis of tolerance towards the other. The distinction between tangible and intangible is in a way a heuristic device, since a tangible heritage might have an intangible dimension, while an intangible heritage might have a tangible manifestation. Therefore, a comprehensive heritage study must not separate, but rather should encompass both categories, which have been done in IGRMS. In emphasizing traditional knowledge systems, the IGRMS does not romanticize as a changeless essential entity, but rather tries to bring out the elements of culture as an input in sustainable development. That is a very important area. For example, traditional water management and sacred groves are some examples. As the goal of developing scientific temper is emphasized not by high-tech science, but by the dynamic and innovative aspects of traditional knowledge system. To stress the creation of an inclusive society, there are a number of activities of IGRMS relating to the vulnerable sections of society, including women and children. New and emerging issues in museology related to identity, gender, diaspora, and differently abled people are also addressed. By conducting a number of activities in Bhopal and in other parts of the country, IGRMS is facing the twin challenges of bringing communities to museums and of taking museums to the communities. In this interface, attempts are made to demonstrate not only the continuity of traditions, but also how change has been ushered in. In IGRMS, the curator acts as a facilitator to identify the space while the communities are involved in curating the district. Now, this is the tribal habitat on the left, and on the right is the indoor museum. This is the Ravari hut. So you could see that how it is visitor friendly. A person can get in, take photographs and come. He can touch it. He can touch it also. This is Odisha State Museum. At the anthropology section also is there as a part of the whole museum. This is the mass gallery of Odisha State Museum. And there are also tribal museums. I mean, in among the tribal research centers. This is the State Museum of State Tribal Museum in Bhubaneswar, and you could see this display. Now, this is the Tribal Museum Bhopal, and this is interesting. If you see the top slide, there is a bangle. Now, this is a classic example of what we call postmodern display, because this is maybe 100 or more than 100 times bigger than the actual bangle. So therefore, the idea is to create a wow factor. When you go there, you see that there is a wow factor. So then you become curious to see what are the other things there. Then let us discuss something on museum with anthropological perspectives. In 2010, I concluded in my Professor B.M. Das Memorial Oration at Bhopal, and I quote, and this is my paper. To me, homogenization of multiple voices in the name of integration would result in not only intellectual sterilization of the museum profession, but also would do more disservice to the cause of national integration by silencing this dissenting imagination. Could today's museum professionals live up to the challenge of displaying dissenting imagination? Only posterity will evaluate our success or otherwise in this regard. This is 2010. Now, lo and behold, what happened in 2014? Within 4 years, I got my answer. Then remember Bhopal Museum. I'm sorry, this museum is closed now. But then this was set up in 2014. This is the first museum that tells the story of contemporary event and social movement. A team of survivors, activists, academics, and museum professionals. This was opened on the 30th anniversary of the Union Carbide gas leak in 2014. You know that there was a gas leak in Bhopal, and where many people died. The first museum in India that has not, you see, this is how radical it is. The first museum in India that has not accepted a single rupee from either the government or any corporation, both of whom are regarded as guilty in their eyes. It tells the story of trauma of the 1984 Union Carbide gas leak in Bhopal. It resulted in the deaths of approximately 4,000 people in the first few days and eventually claimed the lives of 14,000 local residents. Over 1.5 lakh people remain chronically ill, and disaffected families have reported higher number of disability among children over the years. So therefore, the memory, there is no consensus as far as the memory is concerned. There are contested versions of memories. Preserving the tragic memory of a nation's contemporary history is a political and contentious act, and determines how the democratic discourse is placed in a country like India about such difficult and divisive themes. You know, there were certain earlier attempts of commemoration of this Bhopal Grace tragedy. The first memorial came in 1985. A mother-child statue, a joint artistic collaboration between a Dutch sculptor and survivors, was built with no money from the government. Now the statue is called People's Memorial. Similarly, in 2014, Yadi Hadsa, or Memory of Trauma, conceived as a quiet place of remembrance and homage. Unlike traditional museum, they first oral history and then located objects. You know, the oral history were first collected and then the objects were collected. Display of objects of both personal and protest memory. There is exhibit of short audio recordings of people also. The museum is not only a place to remember, but also to remind others about the tragedy and travesty of justice and about how victims became warriors. The oral histories act as both story and the storyteller. The narrative foreground people rather than the object. These are you see how the radical elements are coming. Hand over the reins of the museum to the community. At the center in the back room is a frayed pink sweater suit of a little infant boy called Sajid, who died in his mother's arms that night. Bismillah's voice tells the heart-wrenching story of the plight. The museum represents a cathartic space where the memories of trauma is shared and the struggle for justice is celebrated. It is meant to be a safe and empowering space that does not force survivors to abandon their anger. The museum aims to be a fluid and dynamic site. Many survivors who visited the museum had left in tears and promised to keep more objects memory. And this is the Remember Bhopal Museum. This is again another slide. Now, another museum is called Partition Museum in Amritsar, 2017. World's first partition museum. India and Pakistan experienced the largest migration in history, 18 million. An NGO, the Arts and Cultural Heritage Trust 2017, in the 70th year of the partition of Town Hall, was given by the Punjab government. This was voluntarism in the field of art and culture, a generational shift in the country, born post-partition with no baggage. Because, you know, immediately after this, people were very scared whether they should have this kind of museum or not. But now, this generation with no baggage, you know, they have the guts to go for this museum. There were partners in helping design websites, recording oral histories, and conducting research. On October 24, 2016, a curtain raiser exhibition, Partition, Migration and Hope, before setting up the museum as a series of public interaction in Delhi, Chandigarh, Amritsar, and London. A series of interactions took place. And then this museum came up. The idea, not to sensationalize this homelessness, to create an archive and to learn never to inflict this pain on another. There were questions that were never asked, yet the silence imposed was considered unfair but desirable. Communal killings made it impossible to document in a public space. There was a dark fear overhanging the partition that kept us all silent, and yet the partition was the wound which formed the country and gave us many of the political narratives since independence. The story of partition is much more than the communal violence narrative that has engulfed it for decades. Can we really suppress all these memories? To record the largest migration ever, to collect the documents, oral histories, and other archives that are spread all around the world. Visitors weep and even accost us. I'm quoting from a paper actually on this museum. Accost us asking why we took so long to set this museum up. There are 10 galleries. The final exit is the Gallery of Hope, where there are inspirational stories of people who dealt with their grief, rising above it, using their transformational experience to become artists, poets, and authors. So this shows the kind of resilience of human spirit, human mind. It is also a contemporary expression of how people view partition today. For example, an interactive installation as the Tree of Hope created out of barbed wire, but which is slowly became green through the leaves which visitors hang upon it. This means that the implication is to move forward, to move in peace. This is a people's museum, to learn to deal with this fear, just as survivors deal with theirs. And this is the Partition Museum in Amritsar. This is the gallery, there's a barbed wire, and people, the visitors, put a green leaf. So that means this symbolizing the sense of, the barbed wire represents the pain of partition. But there's this green leaves, it's a sense of hope. It's an aspiration to live in peace. People's Museum in Kakching, I visited in Manipur. It's a 40 kilometers towards of Imphal town. It was established in 1988 with great enthusiasm of Sri Gaurachan Singh. He is no more. When I visited him, he was alive. It's a multi-purpose character and composed of objects of archaeological, ethnological, and paleontological values. The artifacts range from Stone Age tools to contemporary records, traditional costumes, wooden seats, weighing machines, ancient and medieval manuscripts, traditional costumes, and also this gives an example of assertion of identity. This is the person who has built this museum. You could see this very small space, and these are the collections. Let me talk about Peace Museum in Imphal. This is a commemoration of the Platinum Jubilee of the Battle of Imphal and the opening of the Imphal Peace Museum on 22nd June 2019. Now, you have to bear it in mind that the Second World War was fought in Imphal. I mean, where the Japanese and the British fought each other at Imphal, and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose came to Moirang, and sort of unfurled the national flag there. So, therefore, you find two kinds of cemeteries. The British cemeteries is there, and also the Japanese cemeteries is there. And now, on the 75th anniversary, that the Platinum Jubilee, both these groups came together, and a museum of peace has been set up. The Imphal Peace Museum is historically significant because it stands for reconciliation and peace, a tribute to the soldiers and civilians who have lost their lives. It also narrates the experience of the Manipuris during the war. Manipur is a small state, and the impact of the war on their society and culture, and their resilience, and how the Manipuris have moved beyond. The commemorative program witnessed the visit of dignitaries from United Kingdom, Japan at the battleground of Baibam Lokta, also known as the Red Hill. Now, this is the Peace Museum in Imphal, and this is the last gallery which represents the textile of different communities of Manipur. That shows two things. One, the kind of cultural integration of Manipur, and also it shows also a symbol of resilience of how Manipur came out from the wounds of the Second World War. There is another very interesting museum. It's called Basa Museum in Tesgad in Gujarat. Basa means voice, the speech or expression, located at Tesgad in Gujarat, and it is regarded as the Museum of Adivasi Voice. And Ganesh Devi, the great linguist, is the main person behind it, and the local tribals also are very active participants of this museum. It represents the Adivasi cultural production and is curated by them, which is an evolving practice through collective participation. It emerged from an experiment of the Adivasi Academy to explore the link between denial of access to the means of development and the structural aphasia imposed on the marginalized languages, with an emphasis on process of self-reliance rather than achieving quantitative success through the academy. There has been a conscious attempt at recovering the cultural memory of the nomadic and Adivasi communities and investigate it into economic and social dynamics in such a way that culture could be monetized without disrupting the organic coherence between the Adivasi psyche and their material success. As regards the relevance, the communities that are culturally marginalized and economically disadvantaged, an element of their pride in their identity is important as a strategy to empower them. Therefore, museum as a means of asserting identity, and that assertion of identity is a means to empower the local community. So one is to understand museum from that perspective. And the museum is the centerpiece of the academy. The largest collection of Adivasi art is in its gallery. Also, there is this Rathwa Adivasi community who are also responsible for making this museum. Their painting is known as the Pithora painting. They are also there. The largest collection of resource literature on Indian tribes. An open museum of languages. You look at the concept. An open museum of language, it is called Basa Bond, forest languages, wherein each tree, through the use of sensor, speaks a different language. A photo archive of about 60,000 images with the Adivasi objects received from German and British museums. An exhibition was organized symbolizing a move towards decolonization of Adivasi culture. Purva Prakash is the first community-owned publishing program of the Adivasis. A magazine called Dhol or Drum is done in a few in tribal languages, and it intended to be read out loud rather than for individual reading. See how the paradigm shift. We read the book ourselves, but this Dhol or Drum, you have to read out for others. You are not reading out for yourself. You are reading out for others. An Adivasi craft cooperative known as Tribals First has also been formed. Bhacha is thus a self-made and a notable expression of Adivasi gaze. This is the entrance of Bhacha. This is another exhibition. This is another. And look at these wooden masks. And look at these tribals, participating in this museum. This is also the community engagement. Now there is another museum at Bhopal, at Ahmedabad, which is known as Bhacha Museum. It's a museum of utensils, right from Harappan period to the contemporary time. How the rural folk people use their utensils. That is there in Ahmedabad. Then there is another interesting museum called Arna Museum near Jodhpur in Rajasthan. It's an extensive collection of brooms from Rajasthan. The major collection is brooms, So what do you do with brooms? Now, with the broom, then they study, but who has made them? What is its important implications for political economy? How do they survive? What is its relationship with their society? So broom is just it's a material aspect, but then it represents wide aspect of the local culture. A series of videos highlights the communities, labor skills, and even this associated with broom production due to sensitizing the audience. A stunning collection of musical instruments unique to Western India, popular instruments, Raban Hatta, Gujaratan Sarangi, Sindhi Sarangi, and the Surinda, no longer in use or produced. Dantar, Jogia, Sarangi, and Nakpani, pottery and puppetry are also highlighted in two modules. This is the Arna Jarna in Rajasthan. Now there is Jonapada Lok in Ramnagar district of Karnataka. When you are going from Bangalore to Mysore, you will come across the Jonapada Lok. This is another fantastic open air museum in Karnataka. Now, towards the last aspect, that the implications of COVID for COVID-19 for museum anthropology. Now, Jens and Grattan, they say that museums are not intended to resolve climate change or other global problems, but museums are in a position to invent a new future for themselves and their communities. That museum can be used as a kind of a platform, as a media, as a space, and it can help create an image of desirable future, the essential first step in its realization. Now, coming back to the museum and COVID-19 pandemic, the museum it has been used as a public platform to debate, deliberate, and disseminate and create public awareness about COVID-19. An exhibition, I visualize, in India, we should, and I was suggesting IRMS whether they could do this. I would be very happy if there will be an exhibition on how people test it, along with all artifacts associated with it. For example, mask, PPE, sanitizer. And this is, it's a global problem, but how the local responded to it. For example, I came across certain Odishan tribals using masks made of sal leaf. And what is to deal with unemployment, domestic violence, migration labor, all these, how they are linked with COVID-19, that kind of thing. And how have we learned to live with what we call new normal? How it made superpowers vulnerable. And what is the implication of corona pandemic for anthropology as a discipline? It is time to reflect on us. Now, Maggie, in 2019, he suggested that how can museums support the sustainable development goals? He said that by making sure all their external activities support SDGs. He proposed a 6-step plan and 7 key activities. And he says that relevant for museums, museum workers, networks, funders, and other stakeholders. He suggested 2 types, some directly linked to anthropology as a discipline, and some others that have emerged with challenging concept with anthropological perspective. Now, to conclude, the concept of museum as static, moribund, irrelevant, and anachronistic is challenged in the post-colonial period. Like the concept of development from below, history from below, these are the concepts which have emerged in other disciplines. In economics, development from below. In history, history from below. Would we now suggest for a concept of museum from below in India, because of increasing emphasis on people-centric approach and even challenging the grand narrative of traditional museological discourse? Can we do that? I end there. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind and patient hearing.
Thank you so much, Basa sir. It was such an interesting and informative lecture, giving a background, the history, and also the chronologically how museums have been established and the perspectives of different scholars, and also very vibrant pictures of different museums, how they've been set up across the country, and talking about the living museums, which are more interactive and immersive, which are now the norm. And in fact, some of the new museums which you have talked about relating to the events like Bhopal, I think they are very much important because post tsunami, my own work on memorials, whether it's in Chennai or in Sri Lanka, they are also very important testimony of the events which have happened in the past, and people to remember these incidents which are unfortunately kind of disasters. At the same time, your suggestion about bringing in COVID-19 and its experiences, a beautiful idea to also showcase all the pictures or the experiences of people would be very interesting to put in IGRMS. I'm very fortunate to have seen some of the museums in my own experience, starting from as a student of anthropology, going with Professor Mishra sir. I could see here it is Mishra sir going to Kondareddy tribes, collecting some of the artifacts, in fact, bartering with the tribals there and bringing back to Anthropology Museum, our own department of Hyderabad Central University. That was my first experience of bringing some of the artifacts from the Janjatis. And of course, seeing IGRMS, and in fact, again, Mishra sir took me around to IGRMS museums in the beginning. And this time, Professor Amitabh Pandey, I was really fortunate. And I remember again in Bhubaneswar, Professor Ota showing the Tribal Research Institute's museum. And recently, last year, when we had this World Anthropological Congress, where I could see Cultural Museum in Bhubaneswar with Professor Gala. So, I'm really, really fortunate to see museums with the most eminent scholars who are working in this area. It's been very enriching for me. And I'm sure it's been a very enriching experience for all the participants in this seminar today, lecture today by Professor Basa. I will be very, very glad if some of our senior scholars who are here, Professor K.K. Mishra, Professor Pandey, Professor Anil Kumar, Shalina ma'am, and Professor Ota, they're all here. Would be very glad if you would like to share your own points and comments, sir.
May I, Sunita? I have to leave in a while.
Yes, ma'am.
Congratulations, Professor Basa. Always a delight to listen to you and to see some of those amazing museums across the country and across the world, because that's my passion. That's what I did whenever I went anywhere. I have only one question, the most important one. And that because there was some problem, I was shifting from my phone to laptop, so I might have missed it. But it seems the gender discourse in museums, which is so evident, starting from the very basic science museums that was started much earlier, the display has always been gendered. So is there any, way that we can change this entire discourse of display? that is there, whether we make it contemporary or we make it in whatever form. My other problem and concern is commodification of museums as sellable spaces in which all our government museums, national museums, old museums are lagging behind. So this new phase of commercializing museums, or as museums as commodities, you think are going to cause any kind of upheaval in terms of authenticity, in terms of how the message is conveyed? Thank you. And that's it. Sorry for coming in. I have to go somewhere, but these are my two questions.
Thank
Do I have to answer right now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just very quick, madam. I think these are very two important issues we have raised, and you will be happy to know that in IGRMS, I mean, this gendered perspective is done very sensitively. The display, if you see the display of different paintings, for example, whether it is Madhubani or even Rathwa or sorry, this what is called this Maharashtra ka, Varli paintings. See, usually in IGRMS, in the Bhiti Sankul area, the curator had identified this space, that this is the space for you to paint. And these Varli painters, basically women, they had come and painted. The same thing is Madhubani. The women have come and painted. So in IGRMS, I cannot tell about other museums, but in IGRMS, we are very sensitive to this gendered perspective. And for your information, during my 4.5 years of as director, my most favorite event was an event on gender and museum, and it involved a small discourse on gender and museum, and also we invited the artisans with their looms from different parts of the country. Women textile, they came with their looms. They had displayed it, and also there was a kind of an exhibition on how women are beyond the home and earth, how they are involved in subsistence activities. So they are not confined to home and hearth. And one of our lady curators, he created a kind of a kitchen where she took the artifacts from different communities and then created a very good kitchen. But the most important thing was that we had also organized a cultural program. It was known as Prathama. And I think that was for the first time that women exclusively, one cultural program was organized exclusively by women instrumental players. I'm not talking about dancers. We did not invite any dancer for that program. We invited only women instrumentalists, like tabla, like veena, like this Karnataka ka jo hai Ghatam, and then the Sickle sisters came from Chennai. I mean, that was so we are very concerned about, very conscious in IGRMS. Coming back to the commodification, yes, it is a question of, we may, when we are outside the museum profession, you can make a critique. But then, the kind of the cost of managing the museum has become so much that you cannot just depend only on the government grant. Therefore, you have to your auditorium, you have to have your space, you have to keep it on higher basis to sort of increase your revenue, because that is also very important. That if you don't earn the revenue, it is very difficult to make museums. Yes, we should be concerned about commodification as a discourse, commodification of the kind of museum display. There I agree with you. But we have to make also, we have to be conscious that we have to earn money to run our museum.
Thank you, Basa.
Thank you so much. And I reminded this to you only because I was very much a part of that seminar that was organized.
I know.
It was such a wonderful experience.
Yeah. I know you're there.
Nothing much has happened after that. And that's why this reminder that after so many years, we have not really started talking about gendered marginalization or gendered display of museum. But thank you so much. It was just wonderful to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you so much for joining and also raising a very pertinent question. And would like also you will be missing an announcement. Maybe I'll share with you about the modules that we have created later whenever we meet. Sir, there's one or two points in the chat box. There's Abha Mishra she has asked a question. Are there any museums that document food types?
Immediately it is not coming to my mind, but I think something is there. I'm not immediately it's not coming to my mind, but I can check it. Certainly, I can check it.
Sure. There's another question by Jayadev asking, since anthropology relates to holistic approach, then how can we connect ourselves with post-colonial point of view with respect to museums?
Nobody is denying this. Nobody is denying this integral or integration of the discipline or something like that. But this doesn't mean that the discipline doesn't move on, and the discipline will be just oblivious of the contemporary situation. And if you become oblivious, then people will go away from you. So it is therefore because of this structural functionalism theory, museum and academia in anthropology, there was a kind of divergence. Now again, when there is an emphasis on community, when there is a emphasis on ethnicity, when there is a emphasis on autoethnography, all these are leading again that the museological discourse has come to the center stage of anthropological discourse. That is the thrust of my lecture. That museological discourse is no longer peripheral, marginalized in anthropology. It has to be it has to be in the center stage of anthropological discourse. That is what I meant to say.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And Professor Vijay Prakash also raised a very important point after giving compliments, saying my point is how to inculcate interest among the young generations right from KG to PG level students to get esteem and pride of heritage, tangible and intangible across rural India. Not in terms of tourist perspective, but esteem and identity in basket of plurality of India, targeting upcoming youth. A serious social research need to be contemplated to generate interest, as you said, community bottom-up approach, sir.
I think Professor Vijay Prakash is a very good friend of mine, and he has read every basic issue. And that is what I tell my museum colleagues, that please do not blame the youngsters that they are not taking interest in a museum. Please be empathetic to them. Just reflect on yourself. There is a mall and there is a museum. Now it is your lookout how to sort of take the attention of the youngsters from the mall to the museum. And that's a challenge we have to live with. And if we cannot live up to that challenge, then we should not blame the youngsters. That is what I interrogate myself as a museum professor. If the young mass is not coming, it is not their fault. It is as much as their fault, it is my fault as well. I cannot just be in a romanticized world that museum is a very academically sort of very important institution. It is the moral responsibility or duty of the people to come to museum. Gone are those days. I have to compete with mall. If I can't compete with mall, then I think I have to accept that that I'm living in a different world. So therefore, as you rightly said, we have to have very interesting sort of events in the museum. Let's say that can we take this story? I mean, the best example is I'm forgetting the name of that director of British Museum who wrote a book called 100 Objects, the history of the world in 200 objects. So can you think of certain objects which will throw a very interesting light on the culture? We will take one object and then we'll say how it is woven around the different cultures. So that will attract them. Take a kongi, take a very ordinary object, and then build extraordinary stories out of it. That is how you have to attract. And then second is it has to be tech savvy. You cannot have the dusty museum and expect the youngsters to come. It has to be tech savvy. So that's a challenge, Professor Vijay Prakash, and we have to live with it.
So thank you so much. There's another question by
Mr.
Anand.
Prof. Anand, School of Museum Study, University. Yeah, how tribal museums were used in the post-independence period to advance new ideas of tribe and nation. I think that is the biggest critique we face, Dr. Anand. I think that's why Kalyan Chakraborty was very critical, that you are perpetuating the colonial mode of display and collection. So, and therefore, we give account. I was lucky that, I was director of Indian Museum, which is the colonial museum of this country. And I was also the director of IRMS, which represents the post-colonial this thing. So I accept your point, and that's why we are critical of the continuation of colonial type of display. It is important that, in Indian Museum, I came across one, I think culture minister or somebody came, and he said that my community has not been represented in your museum. So I was both sort of put into a vulnerable position, but on the other hand, I liked it that they are coming and challenging us. I think that now, if we do not, as museum professionals, if we do not display the tribal communities are capable enough to have their small museums to assert their identity. And there are plenty of such museums which are coming in the Northeast India. Therefore, we don't have a choice, Dr. Anand. We have to, as museum professionals, we have to give their sort of convey their voice. We have to be a medium of their voice. We cannot just keep ourselves off. If we keep ourselves off, then they find us in absolute redundant. So in order to be relevant, even the government tribal museums have to speak their voice. I do not know whether that will satisfy you or not, but we have to face the challenge day in and day out.
Thank you, sir. There's another question by Dr. Dhanraj Singh. What advice would you give to an aspiring museologist looking to pursue a career in museum curation or anthropology?
See, the problem, this is a good question in the sense that, what happens is, museology as a subject is in very few universities of this country. For example, National Museum Institute, Aligarh Muslim University, MS University, Baroda, Kolkata. I think these are 4 or 5 institutes, which are teaching museology. But then there is another dimension, that if you are coming from a discipline, because to me, it is important that you should have a core strength in a discipline and then do museum studies, that kind of thing. So that you will have at least a core competence in a discipline. Museology, under the existing course that I have seen, I'm not sure whether that will make you competent in any core discipline. I'm not too sure. Therefore, it is a very difficult thing for me to advise you. The best thing is to have a kind of core subject, and then take a 1-year diploma or something like that in museology, so that you go with a strength of a core knowledge of a core subject, and then do museology. This is what I feel, but this may not be the best advice.
Thank you so much, sir. There are some very good suggestions given by Dr. Anil Sukumaran and also Dr. Neeta Mawaman. So I think all of us can read those very interesting suggestions to increase interest in the museums. And we are Professor Amita Pandey is also here, and Shweta, can you make Sir co-host so that he can unmute and...
He is, ma'am. He's already a co-host.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar. I am privileged that 2 of my distinguished colleagues, Director Indian sort of IRMS, Professor Mishra and Professor Pandey are there, along with our Professor Kala. So it's a great privilege.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It was wonderful. Yes, you have thrown certain things. We have to take note of it. Those things already we keep discussing and we'll be doing it.
Yeah.
सर एक ही पर्सपेक्टिव जो मुझे लगता है, अगेन आई डोंट नो, somehow Indian museums and all of us still carry the legacy of that studying the others and museums for others. वो अवर्स वाला भी म्यूजियम्स नहीं हुआ है, म्यूजियम ऑफ अवर्स, so that we are also aiming to make it. Why document those things? Why not having exhibition on us also? Why only tribal exhibition? Why not the exhibitions on other communities and cultures which are,
of course,
that area also is, because sometimes same legacy of anthropology is studying the others and trying to do it, but then there is diversity. And you rightly said, many things are there like COVID and all those will be working out. So Ashwati is already in pipeline for us. That will be done as I discussed with you. And ecological aspects of museums are also there. Like I got the ecosystem services of a museum studied by IIT Mandi student.
That's a great thing.
Exactly what are the cultural services and all those things we are rendering to the society. And that becomes very important, because the value of 50 rupees ticket and the value of whole cultural things which has a unmeasurable terms. So that has been taken care. So thank you, sir, for a beautiful. I get revived whenever I listen to you, and you throw certain problems to me to resolve it. And I always try to address those problems. And surely I'll look forward to, like COVID one, really you said it. And the Kashmiri migrant can be one other area where we had a whole story of Kashmir.
That will be very interesting, actually. That will be extremely interesting.
वो हो गया sir. And then we are going to come with something others also. You are our guide in. You are our guide supervisor, so no problem for us. Sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Professor Pandey.
Dr. Reddy, I mean, sorry to intervene. I would expect one sentence from Professor Gala.
Yes, definitely Professor Gala and also Professor Mishra, sir.
Mishra, sir, is, his silence speaks volume about me. And when he is silent, I become too apprehensive.
So please, KK Mishra, sir, if you can share your views, I'm sure you have something to say about your friend and also your colleague.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just except congratulating Professor Basa, I have nothing else to say, because we have been interacting on these aspects, and a part of this presentation I have heard before also.
Yes.
And I had given a new kind of concept to IGRMS sometimes back when they had invited me. Amitav is here, so probably he can recollect. I was talking about language museum. Kishore, what I'm feeling is
we are working on it, sir.
Sorry?
We are working on it, sir.
So you are working on it. Yes, I don't know. There was no updating, so I didn't know. Kishore, what I suggested was that the language part is missing in Manav Sangrahalaya. I think there should be a gallery on languages. And we are all concerned about endangered languages. 50% of the language, if we go by the, survey, people's linguistic survey, 50% of Indian languages are already lost. And probably another 50% will be lost very soon. So therefore, there is a need, at least in the museum, as a part of our heritage, we should develop a gallery on languages, and we have to preserve our lost languages. So challenge is on Amitav and others, those who are now looking after museums.
Yes, sir, we'll have soon. I'm working on it. We'll have it soon.
Thank you so much, Mishra, sir. Having seniors like Mishra sir and Basa sir, who have been the predecessor for IGRMS, lot of expectations from Amitavji. I'm sure with his able leadership, he can take these ideas further. And Professor Ota is also here. And
by the way, Professor Ota has sort of this tribal museum in Bhubaneswar. It's a very interesting museum, and the most important thing about that museum is, the tech-savvy nature of that museum.
Yes.
The immersive museum. I think that is the best example. Yeah,
I was fortunate to see it, sir. It was very, very advanced. and very interactive. Over to you, Professor Ota.
Yeah, Professor Basa, my friend. So congratulations to you for such a lively, presentation. I have heard little bit and similar type of, presentation that you had made before, but this has encompassed more museums covering the entire country. So congratulations. One thing we find these days, museum revolution has taken place, right? Everywhere you find, a museum to be coming up. But the pity is what I have been observing. The container is getting done without thinking of the contents. I think you'll agree with me that when we think of a museum, we must think about the content as well as the container. In fact, the museum construction should be done looking at or visualizing what contents you are going to put. I find, you'll be very sorry to know that 10 tribal freedom fighters museums are coming up in the entire country. They are struggling for last 5 years. Why 5 years? From 2017. The basic problem is they have constructed the building or the container without thinking, what will be the contents. As a result of which, when you see the ultimate museum, it doesn't gel. You are at the helm of affairs, our Professor Pandey is at the helm of affairs. I think you people should advise the culture ministry. We have advised the tribal ministry already to think about both container and content before it gets started. This is my
that is absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Thank you so
and
much.
My congratulations to you again, Professor Basa.
Thank you so much, Professor Ota, for raising such an important point. I would like Professor Gala to share a few words, and all of you please stay here for a few more minutes. We want to share something which we are trying to put it across as part of Anthropological Foundation. Over to you, Professor Gala.
Thanks, Professor Reddy. Oh, Professor Basa, wonderful to listen to you. I think the one thing that your talk really brings across is that we as anthropologists need to take both diachronic and synchronic approaches in what we do. And diachronic, so we understand the historical context and decontextualization of cultures and recontextualization. Synchronic to understand the contemporary issues. But there's a disjunction in India. And if you take, for example, the Bhopal Tragedy Museum, Ramalakshmi was the curator who you quoted. She did a great job. One day she rang me and she was really upset that it's closing. So I was in Amravati, and on the last day, 31st of July, I forget which year, I flew to Bhopal. I went to the museum to document before it was closed. So someone earlier on asked about gender. Bhopal Museum, you could not think of it without gender perspectives. Women's voice was heard. Similarly, Partition Museum organically came through, women's concerns and gender voices are there because it's not just men who were displaced. It was women too. And in fact, the leadership were young women with the Partition Museum. And for me, I always tell people that IGRMS is my favorite museum in India. They always say, why? I tell them, because there's participation of stakeholder communities. And this is something that you don't see often in India. And so Dr. Ota just quoted me, about what I said in Bhopal when we did a review of freedom fighters museums. When the Joint Secretary asked me in summary, I said, look, you're building containers without content, because Gurdeshwar was a classic example. They built a museum and then they started saying, what do we put in there? That's how my first introduction. I'm not saying all the 10 museums are like that, at least 2 exceptions I know. And the way Manipur is going ahead with it, with Rani Gaidanli Museum, is exemplary. And but what it says is that we need more interdisciplinary approaches. Why containers are built by insensitive people? They're architects and designers who are not from museum field. So it's outsourcing the construction without integrating, the main mission of the museum that's being established. So I find it amazing coming back to India that how generous the government has been in funding museums. I mean, like the Travel Freedom Fighters museums. So there are buildings being built without the content, which was my one-line summary to Ministry of Travel Affairs. I don't know, Dr. Ota, was it 2 or 3 years ago? We had that meeting in Bhopal. That was also facilitated by IGRMS, by the way. That's why it's my favorite museum, I always tell people. But also the other thing is that I might be wrong and I could be corrected. The number of indigenous people employed in IGRMS would be more than the number employed at the same level in the rest of the country. Non-indigenous people are still, like during colonial times, still at the forefront of determining what is indigeneity. But that is not about decolonizing. If you want to decolonize, we need to, we have highly educated indigenous people. And why are we not engaging them? Why are we not engaging them to participate? So that there is a huge problematic because people talk about decolonization without understanding decolonization. And my last point is that most of the challenges in India are attributed to one issue, and I raised this in the UNESCO forum in Delhi when we're discussing museums. India does not have a national museum policy. Forget that, India does not have a national cultural policy. Now, the question is, how do appropriations take place? What are budgets based on? Without a policy and a strategy. So it tends to be rather well-meaning, but ad hoc. And I think we need to address that. And I think for me, IGRMS, I go there because it's got a clear vision, it's got a clear mission, it's got a clear focus. And I'm always learning because of so many of you as wonderful directors and what you have done at IGRMS. And you can see in my background picture, Dr. Ota, Professor Pandey there, and one of the largest gatherings.
I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah, I know. And we were talking about policy. And so I just want to say thank you for raising all the issues, but also beautiful historical context, the way you outline some exemplary museums that you showcased was very not informative, very educational, what your presentation. And I must say that I'm supposed to have a dinner with the director of a former director of one of the major museums in India, in Bhubaneswar. I'm not there. I'm here to listen to Professor Basa.
Okay, that's on me. Okay.
Sir, I would like to add one thing, sir. I would like to add something, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, sir. Galla, sir, we had some development happening on the cultural policy in the Ministry of Culture. I need to follow it. That is there. So that was one thing which basically attempt was some
Lockout.
Yeah, I think we lost Mitabji. Signal problem. Can't hear you. Okay. Meanwhile, a young scholar, Muzammil Rashid, she shared a comment.
Yeah. What is it?
Yes. So may I know if there are any architectural anthropologists dealing with the design of museums? A colleague who has worked as an engineer and architect for more than 10 years is now an anthropologist and needs to get in touch. He believes that many of the museums he has visited lack several things that could add anthropological value to museums.
I think he's absolutely right. Actually, there has to be a kind of integration between the architects and the museologists. At the conceptual level, they should discuss. Then only the building shape will come. Unless and until you know what is your mode of display, there has to be a kind of convergence between the architect and the museologist. And that's what I feel.
Right.
Before the museum takes a set.
Yes, I think that's important point which came through Professor Gala and Professor Ota also. Sir, we really are grateful to you for such a wonderful lecture. Before we close, as part of Anthropos India Foundation, we've been doing a couple of innovative things because our mandate is to reach out to young scholars and coming from them, what are the things which they lack. And as we all know that anthropology is not taught in many universities, and many students, thousands of students take this course in IGNOU also, but not aware where to go for their careers. So we do organize some workshops. We've done on ethnography, on academic writing, on publishing, on careers in anthropology, 24 careers, which is a book available. But what we felt when we do these workshops, very few join because either they are busy or weekends we generally organize, so they are not able to join. So we are now putting these as in short modules based on the lectures which the workshops we conduct. Like if you remember, sir, Basa sir, one lecture on museology and one lecture by Professor Ota. So a couple of lectures. So what we are planning to do is put them as a capsule of modules. So this is one which we have just now started, which is careers in anthropology. And Aryan, our help in technology, is trying to put things together. So if you see, it'll be like in short modules. Those who have missed these workshops can very well take this. I can't say it as a course, but of course it's a modules, couple of lectures which you see. I mean, can you go down, Aryan, to showcase some of the, like we have these lectures which are recorded with the consent of those scholars. We will be putting them, and then anybody can access these couple of lectures. Like in careers, we have almost 13 lectures on anthropology and academics, anthropology in museum, anthropology and tribal research institutes, anthropology and Archaeological Survey of India. So the scholars can very well reach out and see these modules and learn from them. So this is just a beginning. So we are very glad to have such senior scholars with us. I would like to invite Professor Basa to release it online, and along with Professor Mishra sir, Gala sir, and Pandeyji. So all of you, I mean, this is just a beginning. I mean, I felt that this would really help scholars to know about our discipline, careers, and also other modules will gradually come. This is the first one which we wanted to share. So,
it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to inaugurate this careers in anthropology module. I think this is extremely relevant because this will give an opportunity for students to know about the range of options or range of possibilities for an anthropologist as far as the career is concerned. Usually we used to think of, when we think of anthropology, we used to think of teaching or Anthropological Survey of India or NGO, or to a certain extent ICMR. Except these four, I think there are other possibilities. Not many people are generally aware. So especially this will open up great possibilities for our young students to be attracted towards anthropology in choosing as a career. I congratulate Anthropos India Foundation, as well as Dr. Sunita Reddy for taking this wonderful initiative. And I'm so proud that your colleagues are so good. I must say that it's like this, I'm a very, what should I say? You people approach us in such a manner that is very difficult to escape from you. If I am quote unquote, escape in not in a kind of to avoid, but in real sense of the term. You won't believe when I sent those 3-4 pages to you. The next early morning I was traveling. So, but then I had to finish it. It is like an exam. If you don't do it, you are not doing the right thing. So, thank you very much for your team, because to get such a team, Sunita, I don't know how much experience you have got, but I have experience in that much more. And getting such a team is the real strong point of this of your organization. And I wish the team all success.
Thank you so much, sir. I definitely a dedicated team, and you won't be believing that it's all. A lot of them are part of interns, so you're not even paying them. So you can see the passion they have for this discipline. And with very limited resources, we are able to do this bit of work. And as you rightly said, Dr. Shweta has been coordinating with other team members. All this technology is done by Aryan and Habiba, who's into designing, and there are many others who have joined. Every time we put interns call, we get at least 10-15 applications. So that also shows that young scholars want to engage with us, learn from us, and in fact, they are the ones who are giving back to us in the form of whatever they're working. So we have verticals, and different verticals. We are trying our best to make this foundation a success. And thank you all for agreeing also to be part of our foundation advisory group, and also for the Anthropos books, which we are planning to start. So I'm really grateful to all of you, sir. All of you are guiding us, and with your blessings, we are moving ahead brick by brick. I'm sure we are able to do a little more innovative things. So that's with those words, sir, I would really thank Basa sir for such a wonderful and illuminating lecture. Professor Gala sir for introducing and also sharing his comments. Professor Ota, Professor K.K. Mishra sir, Amitabh ji, and many other distinguished scholars who are gathered here for this evening and spend their evening with all of us. So thank you all. Thank you so much. And as you all know, our newsletters carry Anthropologist of the Month. So this Anthropologist of this month is Professor Basa. By end of this month, we will have a beautiful newsletter, again designed by our scholars. And this is again an effort to bring in our scholars who have contributed so much in anthropology, so that every newsletter you see, you'll have another scholar with their work, their journey, anthropological journey, and also their future plans and some messages to the young scholars. So that's very interesting. And in fact, this newsletter has gone beyond just giving news about our foundation. You'll see a couple of interesting articles which are covering festivals, rituals, many anthropological topics. So we are thinking to rename it, rather than just saying newsletter, maybe cultural contours of India or cultural hues. So we are yet to plan. Maybe whenever we'll have our advisory meeting, we will definitely take your suggestions and take this forward. So thank you so much, sir. And I'm sure those who have joined for the first time can get a glimpse of the foundation through our website and the links which are shared in the chat box. So I would like to thank each and everyone and close the meeting. Thank you so much, sir. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
And take care, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.